The shovel slipped from her bleeding hands for the third time that morning, and Willa Lawson wanted to scream, but her throat was too parched from the Nevada dust to make a sound. She had buried 7 people in the past 2 weeks, her father being the last one she laid to rest at dawn. And now, as the August sun climbed higher over Virginia City in the year 1876, she was digging another grave for Mrs. Henderson, who had succumbed to the fever that was tearing through their small community like wildfire. The blisters on her palms had burst open days ago, leaving raw flesh that bled with every bite of the shovel into the hard desert earth. Her dress, once a respectable gray cotton, was caked with dirt and sweat, clinging to her thin frame. At 22 years old, Willa had expected her life to look different than this, standing alone in the cemetery on the outskirts of town digging graves because there was no one else left to do it. The undertaker had died first, then his assistant. The town doctor followed shortly after. Men were either too sick, too scared, or had fled Virginia City altogether when the fever started claiming lives. Someone had to bury the dead with dignity, and Willa had taken up that burden without being asked. It was not heroism that drove her, but simple human decency and the bone-deep exhaustion that came from watching people suffer. She drove the shovel down again, and this time when it slipped from her grip, she fell to her knees in the partially dug grave, her vision swimming with black spots. The sun was merciless overhead, and she had not eaten since yesterday morning. Water was running low in town, what little they had needed to be boiled first, and she had given her portion to the Hendersons' children who were now orphans. "Madam, you should not be doing this." The voice startled her so badly she nearly toppled over. Willa looked up, shielding her eyes against the glare, and saw a man standing at the edge of the grave. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, trail-dusty and well-used, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who spent more time with horses than people. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking green that seemed almost unnatural in his weathered face, filled with concern as he looked down at her. "Someone has to," Willa said, her voice coming out as barely more than a rasp. She tried to stand, but her legs would not cooperate. The cowboy did not wait for permission. He jumped down into the grave beside her, landing with surprising grace for a man who had to be well over 6 feet tall, and gently took hold of her arms to steady her. "Not like this, you do not. Let me help you out of here." "I can manage," she protested, but the words lacked conviction. Her hands were shaking now, and she could feel fever starting to creep into her own body. Maybe she had caught it after all. Maybe this grave would be hers. "With respect, madam, no, you cannot." His voice was gentle but firm. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all, passing her up to ground level before pulling himself out after her. In one fluid motion, he retrieved the shovel she had dropped. "I will finish this one." "You do not understand," Willa said, trying to find her feet. "This is my responsibility. Mrs. Henderson was my neighbor, and I promised her children I would see her properly buried. Everyone else has left or died, and I cannot just abandon these people to rot in the sun." The cowboy removed his hat, revealing the full extent of his face. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with strong features and a jagged scar running along his jawline. "I understand better than you might think. My name is Garrett Irving, and I have buried my share of good people. You have done more than anyone could ask, but you are about to collapse. When did you last eat?" Willa opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. "Yesterday. The day before." Time had blurred together into an endless cycle of digging and grieving and trying to comfort the dying. "I do not remember." Garrett's expression softened. Sit down before you fall down. There is shade over there by that cottonwood. I will finish this grave and then we are going to get some food in you." When she did not move, he added, "Please, let someone help you for once." Perhaps it was the exhaustion, or perhaps it was the genuine kindness in his eyes, but Willa found herself nodding. She stumbled toward the scraggly cottonwood tree he had indicated, its sparse leaves providing minimal relief from the heat, but better than standing in the direct sun. She sank down against the trunk and watched as Garrett descended back into the grave and began to dig with steady, practiced motions. He worked without speaking, his movements efficient and respectful. The sound of the shovel biting into earth became almost rhythmic, and despite herself, Willa felt her eyelids growing heavy. She tried to fight it, knowing she needed to stay alert, but her body had other ideas. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the sound of Garrett's voice, low and gentle, singing something that might have been a hymn. When she woke, the sun had moved considerably across the sky. Willa jerked upright, panic flooding through her. How long had she been asleep? What about Mrs. Henderson? What about the children who needed to say goodbye to their mother? "Easy now," Garrett said from nearby. He was sitting a few feet away, his back against another tree, and he held out a canteen. "Drink slowly." Willa took the canteen with trembling hands and forced herself to sip rather than gulp, though her body screamed for her to drain the entire thing. The water was warm but clean, and it soothed her raw throat. "The grave," she asked, "finished?" "I took the liberty of riding into town to fetch the undertaker's cart and Mrs. Henderson's body. She is in the ground now, proper and decent. Her children were there, along with a few others from town. I led them in a prayer service. I hope that was all right." Tears burned Willa's eyes. She had failed. She had meant to be there to see it through, and instead she had collapsed like a useless fool. "I should have been there, I promised." "You were in no condition to be anywhere except resting," Garrett said firmly. He reached into a saddlebag beside him and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "The children understood. They were more worried about you than anything else. Said you had been taking care of everyone, never stopping, never resting. They made me promise to make sure you ate something." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal bread and cheese and what looked like dried beef. "It is not much, but it is food." Willa wanted to refuse on principle, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. Garrett's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile, and he handed her a piece of bread. She forced herself to eat slowly, though every instinct urged her to devour it all at once. As she ate, she studied him more carefully. Garrett Irving was not from Virginia City. That much was obvious. His gear had the look of someone who traveled frequently, and his horse, a sturdy paint gelding grazing nearby, was trail-hardened and well cared for. He wore a revolver on his hip, but carried himself more like a working cowboy than a gunslinger. There was something solid about him, dependable, and Willa found herself wondering what had brought him to Virginia City at exactly the moment she had needed help most. "Where did you come from?" she asked between bites. "I was driving cattle from California to Utah with a crew. We stopped outside Virginia City 2 days ago to rest the herd and resupply, but when we rode in, the town was half empty and everyone looked terrified. The other men wanted to leave immediately, afraid of catching whatever sickness was plaguing the place. But I convinced them to make camp a few miles out while I came to see if there was anything that could be done to help." He looked out toward the town, visible in the distance as a cluster of buildings shimmering in the heat. "I have been here since yesterday, helping where I can, boiling water, tending the sick, that sort of thing. I was bringing fresh water to the Henderson house this morning when one of the children said you had gone to dig their mother's grave alone. I followed to see if you needed help. And your cattle, Willa asked. My crew can manage without me for a spell. The trail boss owes me a favor or two, and this seemed more important than moving cows. He met her eyes steadily. No one should have to bear what you have been bearing alone. Something in Willa's chest cracked open at those words, and before she could stop herself, she was crying. Not delicate tears, but great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. All the grief and terror and exhaustion she had been holding back came pouring out, and she could not have stopped it if she tried. She had not cried when her father died, had not allowed herself that luxury because there was too much work to be done, too many people depending on her. But now, with this stranger's unexpected kindness, the dam broke completely. Garrett did not try to stop her or tell her everything would be fine. He simply moved closer and let her cry, occasionally handing her his bandana when she needed it. When the storm finally passed, leaving her hollow and drained, he offered her more water and waited patiently until she was ready to speak again. I am sorry, Willa said, her voice hoarse and wrecked. For what? For being human, Garrett shook his head. You have nothing to apologize for. How many graves have you dug? 7 in 2 weeks. Before that, I helped the doctor tend the sick until he died too. My father got sick trying to help people. He was a minister, used to visit the afflicted to pray with them. He caught the fever and was gone within 3 days. Her hands were shaking again, and she looked down at them, at the blood-stained blisters and torn skin. These hands used to play piano. Now they dig graves. They do holy work, Garrett said quietly. There is no shame in that. Your father would be proud. My father would have wanted me to leave town before I got sick too, but I could not. I kept thinking, just one more day, just one more person to help, and then maybe the fever would break and everything would go back to normal. She laughed bitterly. Foolish, I suppose. Not foolish. Brave. Garrett looked at her bandaged hands again, his expression darkening with concern. But you cannot keep going like this. Those need proper treatment and you need rest. Real rest, not passing out from exhaustion. There is no one to treat them, and I cannot rest while people are dying. The fever is breaking, Garrett told her. I spoke to some of the townspeople this morning. No new cases in 3 days, and several of the sick are starting to recover. The worst is over. Your town will survive, but only if you survive with it. Willa wanted to believe him, but hope felt dangerous. Every time she had allowed herself to think things might improve, another person died. How can you be sure? I cannot be certain, but I have seen fever outbreaks before. They burn hot and fast and then they fade. Virginia City has been through the fire. Now comes the healing. He stood and offered her his hand. Let me take you home. You need to rest properly, and those hands need doctoring. I am no physician, but I know how to treat wounds. I do not even know you, Willa protested weakly, but she took his hand anyway. His grip was warm and solid, calloused from years of hard work but gentle as he pulled her to her feet. That is easily remedied. I am Garrett Irving, 26 years old, originally from Texas, but I have been working cattle drives for the past 8 years. I do not drink to excess. I do not gamble more than I can afford to lose, and I have never struck a woman or child. I believe in honest work for honest pay, and I think people ought to help each other when they can. There, now you know me. His eyes held a glint of humor that Willa found herself responding to despite everything. Willa Lawson, 22 years old, daughter of Reverend Thomas Lawson, who is buried on this hill. I have lived in Virginia City my entire life. I can read and write and play piano, and I used to teach Sunday school before the fever came. She paused, then added, I appreciate your help, Mr. Irving, truly, but I cannot impose on you further. You have your own work to do, your cattle drive to rejoin. Miss Lawson, with all due respect, you are not imposing. I am offering. There is a difference." Garrett whistled, and his horse trotted over obediently. "We are going back to town. I am going to treat those hands, and you are going to sleep in an actual bed for at least 12 hours. Then, when you are recovered, if there is more work to be done, we can do it together. But you are not digging any more graves alone." Willa wanted to argue, but the truth was she had no fight left in her. Her hands throbbed with every heartbeat, her body ached in places she had not known could ache, and the thought of a real bed sounded like paradise. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you." Garrett helped her into his saddle, then swung up behind her. Willa was acutely aware of his presence at her back, solid and warm, as they rode slowly toward Virginia City. She could feel herself starting to drift again, her exhausted body unable to stay alert, and this time she let herself lean back against his chest. His arm came around her waist, steadying her, and she heard him murmur something reassuring that she did not quite catch before sleep claimed her once more. She woke briefly when they arrived at her small house on the edge of town, a modest 2-room structure that had been her home her entire life. Garrett lifted her down from the saddle as if she were made of spun glass and carried her inside. She tried to protest, to say she could walk, but he ignored her and deposited her gently on her bed. "Where do you keep your medical supplies?" he asked, already moving through the room with purpose. "Cabinet by the stove," Willa managed. She watched through half-closed eyes as he found what he needed and brought it back to her bedside. He lit the lamp even though it was still daylight, needing the extra light to see what he was doing, and then carefully took one of her hands in his. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "I need to clean these properly." Willa nodded, bracing herself. She had set bones and stitched wounds under her father's direction. She knew what was coming. But knowing and experiencing were two different things. When the alcohol hit her raw flesh, she bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out. Garrett worked quickly but thoroughly, cleaning each wound and applying a salve that smelled of herbs before wrapping both hands in clean bandages. "You did well," he said when he finished. "These will heal, but you need to keep them clean and dry. No more digging for at least a week, preferably 2. "I cannot promise that," Willa said. "If someone dies, then I will dig the grave. I am staying in Virginia City for a while longer." My trail boss agreed to it when I explained the situation. Garrett pulled a chair over to her bedside and sat down. "You are not alone anymore, Willa. I know you have been carrying this burden by yourself, but you do not have to anymore. Let me help." "Why?" The question came out more bluntly than she intended. "Why would you stay here with the fever, with the death? You do not know these people. You do not know me. You could ride away right now and no one would blame you." Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes searching her face. "When I was 14, my whole family died of cholera. Parents, 2 brothers, a sister. I was the only one who survived, and only because a stranger stopped to help. An old cowboy who had no reason to care about some sick kid found me delirious on the side of the road and nursed me back to health. He could have ridden past, probably should have to protect himself, but he did not. He stayed with me for weeks, tended me through the worst of it, and when I recovered, he gave me my first job working cattle. He said sometimes you help people not because you expect anything in return, but because it is the right thing to do, and you hope that kindness ripples out into the world." He paused. "That man died 5 years ago, but I still try to live by what he taught me. So when I see someone who has been helping others to the point of destroying herself, I cannot just ride away. I will not." Willa felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back. "I am sorry about your family. And I am sorry about your father and your neighbors and everyone this town has lost. But we are still here, and that means something. We honor the dead by taking care of the living." Garrett stood and pulled the quilt up over her. "Sleep now. I will be right here. If you need anything, anything at all, you just call out. You do not have to stay, Willa protested, but her eyes were already closing. I know, but I am going to anyway. His voice seemed to come from very far away. Rest easy, Willa Lawson, you are safe. She wanted to argue more, to insist she did not need watching over like a child, but exhaustion won out. Willa sank into sleep like a stone dropping into deep water, and for the first time in weeks, she felt herself truly relax. When she woke again, the room was dark except for the low glow of the lamp. Willa lay still for a moment, disoriented, trying to remember where she was. Her own bed in her own house. She turned her head and saw Garrett sitting in the chair beside her, his long legs stretched out in front of him, his hat tipped low over his face. He appeared to be sleeping, though she had the sense that he would wake at the slightest sound. Willa pushed herself up carefully, testing her body's limits. The fog in her head had cleared, and while she was still exhausted, it was the normal tiredness that came from hard work rather than the bone-deep depletion she had felt before. Her hands throbbed, but the pain was manageable now that they had been properly treated. "How are you feeling?" Garrett asked without moving, and Willa jumped slightly. She had thought he was asleep. "Better. What time is it?" "Near midnight. You slept for about 6 hours. He pushed his hat back and sat up straighter. "Are you hungry? I found some eggs and made soup earlier. It is probably still warm." Willa's stomach answered for her with an embarrassingly loud growl, and Garrett's mouth curved into a smile. He rose and ladled soup from a pot on the stove into a bowl, then brought it to her along with a spoon. Willa took it gratefully, marveling at the simple domesticity of the moment. A man she had met just that morning was serving her soup in her own kitchen, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The soup was simple but good, made from vegetables and chicken, and Willa ate slowly, savoring each bite. Garrett watched her with an expression she could not quite read, something between concern and satisfaction. "Did anyone else die while I was sleeping?" she asked. "No. I checked on the sick while you rested. Several are improving. The Hendersons' children are staying with the Carver family for now. Everyone in town wanted me to tell you they are grateful for all you have done." He hesitated. "They also wanted me to tell you that you have done enough, and they will not think less of you if you rest now." "They are good people," Willa said softly. "Virginia City has always been a good town. The silver mines brought in some rough characters over the years, but the core community, the families who stayed, they are decent folk who look after each other. Or they were before the fever. They still are. This has not broken them, just tested them. They will rebuild." Garrett paused. "What will you do now? Do you have family elsewhere you could go to?" The question sent a chill through Willa. "No, my mother died when I was young, my father is gone, and I have no siblings. Virginia City is my home. I cannot imagine being anywhere else." "Then you will stay and help your town heal, but you will do it sensibly with proper rest and care for yourself." "Agreed." Willa found herself nodding. There was something compelling about Garrett Irving, something that made her want to trust him despite having known him for less than a day. Maybe it was the genuine kindness in his eyes, or the way he had treated her with respect rather than pity. Maybe it was simply that she was so tired of being strong alone. "How long are you staying?" she asked. "As long as I am needed. The cattle are being taken care of by my crew, and the trail boss said I can catch up with them in Utah when I am ready." He leaned back in his chair. "Besides, I have never been to Virginia City properly. Once the fever passes completely, I would like to see more of the town." "There is not much to see," Willa said, but she felt a small smile tugging at her lips. "Some silver mines, a few saloons, the usual assortment of shops and churches. We have a newspaper office, though I am not sure if the editor is still alive to run it. We used to have dances every Saturday night at the community hall. Used to, before the fever. Everything stopped when people started getting sick. Willa finished her soup and set the bowl aside. I suppose eventually things will return to normal, or some version of normal anyway. It will never be quite the same. Nothing ever is, Garrett said quietly, but different does not always mean worse. Sometimes it just means changed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Willa found herself studying him in the lamplight. Garrett had removed his vest and rolled up his sleeves at some point, revealing strong forearms marked with scars and sun damage. His hands, resting on his knees, were large and capable, the hands of someone who worked with them every day. There was a gentleness to him that seemed at odds with the rough cowboy exterior, a thoughtfulness in how he moved and spoke. "Tell me about the cattle drives," she said, wanting to hear him talk, to focus on something other than death and sickness. Garrett's face lit up in a way that made him look younger. "There is something about being out on the open range that I cannot quite explain. It is hard work, make no mistake, long days in the saddle, sleeping on the ground, dealing with weather and ornery cattle and everything else that can go wrong. But there is a freedom to it too. You wake up with the sun, ride all day under open sky, and fall asleep under more stars than you can count. You learn to read the land, to understand the animals, to work as part of a team where every man depends on the others. It is honest work, and at the end of a drive, you know you accomplished something real." "It sounds lonely," Willa said. "Sometimes it is. But sometimes the silence is good, gives you time to think, and the crew becomes like family after a while. You spend months together, you learn to trust each other with your life." He paused. "Though I will admit, there are times I miss being part of a community like this. Having a place to call home, people who know you, that kind of thing. The cowboy life is good, but it is not permanent." "Do you ever think about settling down somewhere?" Garrett met her eyes, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I have been thinking about it more lately. I am 26, not exactly old but not young either. Most of the men I work with are planning to buy land eventually, start ranches of their own. Maybe it is time I started thinking about that too." "Where would you go?" "I do not know yet. Somewhere with good grazing land, not too far from a town. Somewhere a man could build a life." He seemed to realize how personal the conversation had become and shifted slightly in his chair. "But that is future talk. Right now I am here and you need more rest. Lie back down. I will wake you if anything happens." Willa wanted to protest that she was not tired, but that would have been a lie. Her body was still recovering from weeks of strain, and even 6 hours of sleep had not been enough. She settled back against the pillows, pulling the quilt up. "Will you tell me more? About the drives, I mean. I like hearing you talk." "All right," Garrett said, his voice dropping to a low, soothing rumble. "I will tell you about the time we were driving cattle through a thunderstorm in Kansas." He talked for a long time, spinning stories of life on the trail, and Willa drifted in and out of sleep listening to his voice. It felt safe, having him there, and she realized with a start how much she had missed this, the simple comfort of another person's presence. She had been alone since her father died, carrying everything by herself, and the weight of that isolation had been crushing without her even realizing it. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Garrett stayed in Virginia City, splitting his time between checking on the sick, helping with practical matters around town, and making sure Willa rested properly. He was true to his word about not letting her dig any more graves. When old Mr. Peterson died on the 3rd day, Garrett handled the burial himself while Willa watched from the shade, her bandaged hands resting in her lap. The fever did break, just as Garrett had predicted. By the end of the week, only 2 people remained sick, and they were improving. The town began to cautiously emerge from the shadow of death, people venturing out of their homes, helping to clean up and repair. Willa's hands healed slowly, the blisters scabbing over and new skin forming beneath the bandages. Garrett changed them every day with steady, careful hands, and Willa found herself looking forward to those moments more than she wanted to admit. They talked while he worked, sharing stories of their lives. Willa learned that Garrett had been born in a small town outside San Antonio, that he loved horses but was terrified of deep water, that he could play the harmonica passably well, but could not carry a tune to save his life. She told him about growing up as a preacher's daughter, about learning to play piano from a traveling music teacher, about her dreams of one day visiting San Francisco or even New York City. "Why have you not gone?" Garrett asked as he rewrapped her left hand one morning. "My father needed me here." And then the fever came, and by the time I thought about leaving, it seemed too late. Besides, I am not sure I would fit in anywhere else. Virginia City is all I know. "You would fit in anywhere," Garrett said firmly. "You are strong, capable kind. Any place would be lucky to have you." Willa felt heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Nevada sun. "You barely know me. I know enough. I have seen how you treat people, how you kept going when anyone else would have given up. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He finished tying off the bandage and sat back. "There, they are healing well. Another week and you should be able to use your hands normally again. Thank you for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not shown up when you did. You would have managed somehow." "You are a survivor, Willa Lawson." Garrett stood and stretched, his joints popping audibly. "But I am glad I could help, and I am glad I met you." The way he said it, with that particular softness in his voice, made Willa's heart skip. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw the way he was watching her. There was affection in his eyes and admiration, and something else she was afraid to name. It had only been a week, hardly any time at all, but she felt drawn to this man in a way she had never experienced before. He made her feel safe and seen and valued, and she realized with a start that she did not want him to leave. "Garrett," she said, then hesitated, not sure what she wanted to say. He waited patiently, his green eyes gentle on her face. "When will you rejoin your cattle drive?" Something flickered across his expression. "I sent word to my trail boss yesterday. He is in Utah now with the herd. He said my share of the pay will be waiting for me when I arrive, but there is no rush. He understands I was needed here, but you will go eventually." "I will have to eventually. That is my livelihood, at least for now." Garrett crouched down so he was at her eye level. "But I am not leaving today or tomorrow or even next week. Not until I know you and this town are truly all right, and even then." He trailed off, seeming uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "Even then what?" "Even then, I hope I might have reason to return, if there was something or someone worth coming back to." Willa's breath caught. They were treading into dangerous territory now, acknowledging feelings that had grown faster than either of them had anticipated. It was too soon, the rational part of her mind insisted. She had known him barely a week, but her heart, battered and worn as it was, seemed to have other ideas. "I would like that," she said quietly, "if you came back." Garrett's face broke into a smile that transformed his entire appearance, making him almost boyish despite the weathering of years on the trail. "Then I will. That is a promise." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek for just a moment. The gesture was tender and intimate, and Willa found herself leaning into his touch before she could think better of it. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Garrett cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "I should check on the Hendersons' children. They wanted to know if you were well enough for visitors." "I am," Willa said, trying to steady her racing heart. "Tell them they can come by this afternoon." After Garrett left, Willa sat alone in her small house and tried to make sense of what she was feeling. She had never courted anyone seriously before. There had been boys in town who had shown interest over the years, but none of them had stirred anything in her heart. Her father had always said she would know when she met the right person, that it would feel different. She had thought he was being sentimental, but now she wondered if he had been right. Garrett Irving had appeared in her life at her lowest moment and helped her without expecting anything in return. He had treated her with respect and kindness, had seen her at her worst, and not flinched away. More than that, he made her feel things she had never felt before, a warmth in her chest when he smiled, a sense of safety when he was near, a longing for more when he left. But he was a cowboy, a man whose life was spent on the trail. Even if he had feelings for her, what future could there be? She could not leave Virginia City, not when the town was still recovering, not when this was the only home she had ever known. And she could not ask him to give up the life he loved, the freedom he had described with such obvious passion. Willa was still wrestling with these thoughts when the Hendersons' children arrived that afternoon. Sarah, the oldest at 9, carried a basket covered with a cloth. Her brother James, 7, and little sister Emma, just 5, flanked her on either side. They looked cleaner and better fed than the last time Willa had seen them, though their eyes still held the shadow of grief. "Miss Lawson," Sarah said, bobbing a curtsy, "we brought you something." Willa invited them in and was surprised when Sarah unveiled the basket to reveal fresh bread, jam, and what looked like a small cherry pie. "Where did all this come from?" "Mrs. Carver helped us make it," Sarah said. "We wanted to thank you for taking care of our mama and making sure she had a proper burial. Mr. Irving said you were the one who had been burying everyone, that you worked until your hands bled." "Oh, sweetheart, you do not need to thank me. Your mother was a good woman and she deserved to be treated with dignity." Willa felt tears threatening but blinked them back. These children had lost their mother. They did not need to see her crying. "Mr. Irving is nice," Emma piped up. "He tells good stories and he let me pet his horse." "He is teaching us how to rope," James added with enthusiasm. "He said every kid should know how to throw a lasso, just in case." Willa smiled despite herself. Of course Garrett was teaching them practical skills while distracting them from their grief. "He is a good man." "Are you going to marry him?" Emma asked with the brutal directness of a 5-year-old. "Emma," Sarah hissed, her face turning red, "you cannot ask people that." "Why not? I heard Mrs. Carver say that Miss Lawson and Mr. Irving would make a fine couple." Willa felt heat flooding her own cheeks. "Mr. Irving and I are friends. He helped our town during a difficult time and we are all grateful to him." "But do you like him?" Emma persisted, and Sarah looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. "Yes, I like him," Willa admitted. "He is a good friend." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, though the gleam in her eye suggested she suspected more. The children stayed for about an hour, chattering about their new living situation with the Carvers and the slowly returning normalcy to Virginia City. When they left, Willa felt lighter somehow, as if their resilience had reminded her that life did go on. That evening, Garrett returned with fresh water and news from town. The newspaper editor survived. He is planning to publish an edition next week documenting what happened and honoring those who died. He wants to interview you. Me. Whatever for. Because you were the one who held things together when everyone else was falling apart. People remember that, Willa. They want to honor your courage. It was not courage. It was just doing what needed to be done. That is what courage is, Garrett said gently. Doing what needs to be done, even when you are terrified, especially then. Willa shook her head but did not argue further. Instead, she asked, "Will you stay for supper? I cannot cook with my hands like this, but the Henderson children brought food and there is more than enough to share." "I would like that." They ate together as the sun set outside, painting the Nevada sky in shades of orange and pink. The conversation flowed easily between them now, the initial awkwardness of strangers giving way to something more comfortable. Garrett told her more about his years on the trail, and Willa shared memories of Virginia City before the fever, painting a picture of a vibrant community that she hoped would return. After they ate, Garrett produced a harmonica from his pocket. "You mentioned you play piano. I thought maybe we could have some music. It has been too quiet around here." Willa's piano sat in the corner of the room, dusty from disuse. She had not played since her father died, could not bear the thought of music when so many were suffering. But now, with Garrett looking at her hopefully, she felt a spark of the old joy that music had always brought her. "My hands are still bandaged," she protested weakly. "I will be gentle. Just a few notes if you can manage it. I think this town needs to hear something beautiful." How could she refuse? Willa sat at the piano bench and carefully placed her bandaged hands on the keys. The first notes came out tentatively, her injured fingers stiff and uncertain. But gradually, muscle memory took over, and she found herself playing a simple melody, one of the hymns her father had loved. Garrett joined in on the harmonica, his playing rough around the edges but earnest. Together they made music, and despite the imperfection of it, there was something healing in the act. Willa could hear doors opening outside, people stepping out of their homes to listen. Someone started singing along, then another voice joined in, and soon half the street was singing together, the first time since the fever that the community had truly come together. When the song ended, there was a moment of profound silence and then applause. Willa looked up to see neighbors gathered outside her window, some with tears streaming down their faces. Mrs. Carver was holding the Henderson children close. Old Mr. Willis, who had lost his wife to the fever, was openly weeping. "Thank you," Mrs. Carver called out. "We needed that. We needed to remember there is still beauty in the world." People began to drift back to their homes, but the mood had shifted. There was a lightness in the air that had not been there before, a sense that perhaps they really were going to be all right. Garrett stood behind Willa, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "See, that is the Willa Lawson I see, someone who brings light to dark places." She reached up and placed one of her bandaged hands over his, unable to find words for what she was feeling. They stood like that for a long moment, and Willa felt something inside her shift and settle. This was right. Whatever happened next, this moment was right. Over the next week, Virginia City continued its slow recovery. The last of the sick began to improve, and the town started to look toward the future. There was talk of holding a memorial service for all those who had died, and plans were made to begin repairing buildings that had fallen into disrepair during the crisis. Garrett became a fixture in the community during this time. He helped repair roofs, dug a new well when the old one showed signs of contamination, and spent hours listening to the stories of those who had lost loved ones. People took to him quickly, appreciating his steady presence and willingness to help, and every evening he returned to Willa's house. They never discussed whether this was proper or what the neighbors might think. It simply became their routine. He would bring news and supplies, she would share whatever food was available, and they would talk late into the night. Sometimes they made music together, and sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. Willa's hands healed, the bandages coming off to reveal new pink skin where the blisters had been. She flexed her fingers experimentally, testing their strength. They were tender still, but functional. She was whole again, at least physically. "You should be able to return to normal activities now," Garrett said, examining her hands one last time. "Though I would avoid heavy labor for a while longer." "What counts as heavy labor? Digging graves, for instance?" His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. "Promise me you will not push yourself so hard again. Virginia City needs you, but they need you healthy." "I promise." "Besides, you taught half the town how to dig proper graves during your time here. I think my services as the unofficial undertaker are no longer required." She smiled, but it faded quickly. "When will you leave?" The question had been hovering between them for days, unspoken but always present. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing absent circles on the back of her hand. "I should probably rejoin my crew in Utah soon. I have been gone nearly 3 weeks now. That is a long time to be absent from a job." "I understand." Willa tried to keep her voice steady, but she could not quite manage it. 3 weeks had seemed both endless and far too short. She had grown accustomed to Garrett's presence, to his steady reliability, to the way he made her feel seen and valued. The thought of him riding away left an ache in her chest. "But," Garrett continued, "I have been thinking about what I said before. About settling down, finding a place to call home, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion." "What conclusion?" He took both of her hands in his, careful of the still healing skin. "That I do not want to leave Virginia City, or more specifically, I do not want to leave you." Willa's heart seemed to stop beating entirely for a moment, then started up again at double speed. "Garrett, I know it has not been long," he said quickly. "I know this probably seems hasty or foolish, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, Willa. You are strong and kind and brave, and being with you feels right in a way nothing else ever has. I do not want to go back to the trail. I want to stay here in Virginia City if you will have me. I want to build a life in this town, maybe buy some land and start a small ranch. I want to court you properly, with flowers and Sunday dinners and all the things people do when they are serious about someone." He paused, his green eyes searching her face. "That is, if you feel even a fraction of what I am feeling." Willa felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but for the first time in weeks, they were happy tears. "I feel it all. I feel everything. I did not know it was possible to care for someone this much after such a short time, but I do. When I think about you leaving, it feels like losing something essential. So yes, Garrett Irving, I will have you. I want you to stay. I want you to court me, and I want to see where this goes." Garrett's face broke into the most beautiful smile she had ever seen. He pulled her gently to her feet and cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you, please?" Willa whispered. He bent his head and pressed his lips to hers, and it was nothing like she had imagined kisses would be. It was better. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, Willa felt dizzy with joy. "I will need to go to Utah to collect my pay and settle things with my crew," Garrett said, his forehead resting against hers. "But then I will come back. I will always come back to you." "How long will you be gone?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. I will ride fast." He kissed her again as if he could not help himself. "Will you wait for me?" "I will wait as long as it takes," Willa promised. "But please be safe and come back to me. Nothing could keep me away." They spent the next 2 days in a haze of happiness, making plans for the future. Garrett spoke with local ranchers about available land and learned that the property adjacent to Virginia City was for sale. It was good grazing land with a reliable water source, perfect for a small cattle operation. Willa helped him sketch out what a house might look like, where the barn should go, how many head of cattle he could reasonably manage starting out. The town responded to the news of Garrett's intention to stay with enthusiasm. He had earned their respect and affection during the crisis, and the idea of him becoming a permanent member of the community pleased everyone. Several men offered to help him build once he returned from Utah, and Mrs. Carver pulled Willa aside to tell her what a fine match they made. On the morning Garrett was set to leave, half the town turned out to see him off. He shook hands with the men, accepted embraces from the women and children, and promised to return as quickly as possible. When he finally reached Willa, standing at the edge of the crowd, he took both her hands in his. 3 weeks, he said. 4 at the most, and then I will be back and we can start building our future. I will count every day, Willa said, trying not to cry. She had cried enough in front of this man. She wanted to be strong for his departure, but Garrett seemed to see through her brave facade. He pulled her close, heedless of the watching crowd, and held her tight. "I love you," he whispered in her ear. "I know it is too soon to say it, but I do. I love you, Willa Lawson, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you if you will let me." "I love you too," Willa whispered back, the words flowing out naturally. "Ride safe, Garrett Irving." He kissed her once more, a quick press of lips that promised more to come, and then swung up into his saddle. His paint horse danced a bit, sensing his rider's eagerness to be gone, but Garrett controlled him with practiced ease. He looked down at Willa, memorizing her face, then turned his horse toward the road leading out of Virginia City. Willa watched until he disappeared from view, her hand raised in farewell. Only when he was completely gone did she allow the tears to fall. But they were not sad tears, not really. They were the tears of someone who had found something precious and was terrified of losing it, but who chose to hope anyway. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of Willa's life. She threw herself into helping Virginia City continue its recovery, teaching children whose regular teacher had died of the fever, helping families repair their homes, and gradually resuming her piano teaching for those who could afford lessons. Every night she prayed for Garrett's safe return, and every morning she woke wondering if this would be the day he rode back into town. The town held its memorial service on a Sunday afternoon, gathering at the cemetery where Willa had dug so many graves. A visiting preacher from a neighboring town led the service, and nearly everyone in Virginia City attended. They spoke the names of the dead, shared memories, and sang hymns. Willa played piano while people sang, her healed hands steady on the keys. When her father's name was spoken, she faltered for just a moment, but then she felt Mrs. Carver's hand on her shoulder, offering support, and she continued playing. This was how they healed together as a community. The dead were gone, but their memory would live on in those who remained. After the service, people lingered in small groups, talking quietly. Several people thanked Willa again for her efforts during the crisis. The newspaper editor showed her the draft of his article, which described her as the Angel of Virginia City, and detailed how she had tended the sick and buried the dead when no one else would. Willa tried to protest the heroic portrait he painted, but he insisted. "People need heroes," he said. "Especially now. Let them have this." As the sun began to set, Willa walked back to her small house feeling emotionally drained but somehow lighter. The memorial had been difficult but necessary. Now they could begin to truly move forward. 3 weeks passed, then 4. Willa tried not to worry, reminding herself that Garrett had said it might take up to a month, but anxiety gnawed at her. What if something had happened to him on the trail? What if he had changed his mind about staying? What if he had decided that building a life in Virginia City was too much work, too much commitment? She was sitting at her piano on a Thursday evening, playing without really thinking about it, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats outside. Her heart leaped, but she forced herself to stay calm. Lots of people rode horses. It did not mean it was him. But then she heard his voice calling her name, and all her resolve crumbled. Willa flew to the door and threw it open to find Garrett dismounting from his paint horse, looking trail-worn and exhausted but smiling. She ran to him without thinking, and he caught her up in his arms, lifting her clean off the ground and spinning her around. "You came back," she gasped against his shoulder. "I told you I would. Nothing could have kept me away." He set her down but did not release her, holding her close as if afraid she might disappear. "I am sorry it took so long. There were complications with the herd in Utah, and I had to help sort them out before I could leave. But I am here now, and I am not going anywhere ever again." Willa pulled back just enough to look at his face, needing to confirm this was real, that he was truly here. Garrett looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw, but his eyes were bright with joy as he looked at her. "Tell me everything," she said. "Come inside. I will make coffee, and you can tell me about Utah and the drive and everything." They spent the evening catching up. Garrett described the remainder of the cattle drive, the challenges of moving several hundred head of cattle through difficult terrain, the relief of finally delivering them to their destination. He had been paid well for his work, and combined with savings from previous drives, he had enough money to buy the land outside Virginia City and start building. "I already spoke to the landowner before I left," he said. "We shook on the deal. Once I pay him, the land is mine." "Ours," he corrected, taking her hand. "If you still want this." "I want this more than anything," Willa assured him. "When do we start building?" "Tomorrow, if you want." Several men in town offered to help, and the sooner we get a house and barn up, the sooner I can bring in cattle and start the ranch properly. He paused, his expression turning serious. "Willa, I need to ask you something important." Her heart began to race. "All right." Garrett slid off his chair and knelt on one knee in front of her. From his pocket, he pulled a small ring, simple gold with a tiny diamond chip. "This was my mother's wedding ring. It is not much, but it is the only thing I have left of my family. I would be honored if you would wear it." He took a deep breath. "Willa Lawson, will you marry me? I know we are doing everything backwards, building a home before we are even engaged, but I do not want to wait. I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Will you have me?" Tears streamed down Willa's face as she nodded frantically. "Yes. Yes, of course I will marry you. I love you, Garrett." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but they could have it sized. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked. "When will you marry me?" "As soon as possible." "I do not see any reason to wait, do you?" "Not a single one. We will speak to the visiting preacher tomorrow. He can marry us this Sunday if he is willing." "This Sunday?" Willa laughed, feeling giddy and wild. "That is just 3 days away." "Too soon." "Not soon enough," she said, and kissed him again. Word of their engagement spread through Virginia City like wildfire. The town, still recovering from so much death and grief, embraced the opportunity to celebrate something joyous. Mrs. Carver took charge of organizing a proper wedding, recruiting other women to help prepare food for a reception. The Henderson children insisted on picking wildflowers to decorate the church. Men who had promised to help Garrett build his house accelerated their timeline, determined to have at least a basic structure completed before the wedding. Willa spent the next 3 days in a blur of activity. She had nothing appropriate to wear for a wedding, but several women pooled their resources, and together they altered a dress that had belonged to Mrs. Carver's daughter into something suitable. It was pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but lovely. Garrett spent those same days working from dawn to dusk on the land he had purchased. With help from what seemed like half the men in Virginia City, they managed to erect a small but sturdy cabin, just 2 rooms but enough to start. They built a corral and the frame of a barn, though completing the barn would have to wait until after the wedding. On Saturday evening, Willa walked out to see the property for the first time. Garrett had wanted it to be a surprise, and she understood why when she crested the small rise and saw what he had accomplished. The cabin sat in a clearing with mountains visible in the distance, the setting sun painting everything golden. It was not grand by any means, but it was solid and real, a home they would share. Garrett met her at the door, his hands stained with wood polish and his hair disheveled from work. "What do you think?" "It is perfect," Willa breathed. "Garrett, you did all this in 3 days. I had help." A lot of help. Everyone wanted to contribute something. Mr. Willis built the bed frame. Mrs. Carver donated some furniture her family did not need anymore. The Henderson children picked stones from the creek to line the path to the door. He took her hand and led her inside. The interior was simple but cozy. There was a main room with a fireplace, a table and 2 chairs, and a rocking chair in the corner. Through a doorway, Willa could see a bedroom with the bed frame Mr. Willis had built, already made up with quilts and pillows that looked like contributions from multiple households. Someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the table, and the whole space smelled of fresh wood and hope. "We can add on as we need to," Garrett said, watching her face anxiously. "Build more rooms, improve things, but this is a start." "It is more than a start, it is a home." Willa turned to him, taking both his hands in hers. "Our home. I cannot believe you did this so quickly. I wanted to give you something permanent, something stable. You have been through so much loss. I want our life together to be about building, not burying." He drew her close. "One more day and you will be my wife." "One more day," Willa echoed, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be, with this man, building this life. They stood like that as the light faded outside, holding each other in their almost home, and Willa thought about the journey that had brought them here. All the grief and pain and exhaustion had led to this moment, to this man who had taken a shovel from her blistered hands and changed her life forever. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Nevada day that made you forget about the brutal heat of summer and the harsh cold of winter. Willa woke in her small house for what would be the last time as a single woman. Mrs. Carver and several other women descended on her early in the morning, helping her bathe and dress and arranging her hair in a style more elaborate than she usually wore. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Carver said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Your father would be so proud." Willa felt tears threatening but blinked them back. She had cried enough over the past months. Today was a day for joy. "Thank you for everything you have done, all of you. I do not know how to repay such kindness." "You do not need to repay anything. You saved this town, Willa. Let us help you celebrate your happiness. It is the least we can do." The church was full when Willa arrived, nearly everyone in Virginia City crammed into the small building. Someone had strung garlands of wildflowers along the pews, and candles flickered everywhere, making the space glow with warm light. At the front of the church, standing beside the visiting preacher, was Garrett. He wore new clothes, a crisp white shirt and dark trousers that someone must have sold or loaned him, and he had shaved and trimmed his hair. But it was his expression that made Willa's breath catch, the way he looked at her as she walked down the aisle as if she were the most precious thing he had ever seen. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Willa heard herself speaking vows, felt Garrett sliding a simple gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, heard the preacher pronounce them husband and wife. Then Garrett was kissing her, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held outside the church, tables laden with food that people had contributed despite their own limited resources. There was music and dancing, and for the first time since the fever, Virginia City felt truly alive. The Hendersons' children ran around with other kids, laughing and playing. Old Mr. Willis actually smiled. Mrs. Carver cried happy tears and kept hugging everyone. As the sun began to set, Garrett pulled Willa aside. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Irving, Mrs. Irving?" Willa tested the name in her mind and found she liked it very much. "Yes, I am ready." They said their goodbyes and rode out to their property on Garrett's paint horse, Willa sitting in front of him with his arms around her. The cabin looked warm and welcoming in the fading light, and when Garrett lifted her down from the saddle, she felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. Inside, Garrett lit lamps and the fireplace, filling the space with light and warmth. He turned to Willa and held out his hand. "Would you dance with me? We barely got a chance at the reception." "There is no music," Willa pointed out, but she took his hand anyway. "We do not need music." He pulled her close and began to sway gently, humming something under his breath. Willa rested her head against his chest and let herself simply feel this moment, the happiness and peace of being exactly where she belonged. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was at my worst and not turning away. For taking that shovel and finishing the grave when my hands were too damaged to continue. For staying when you could have left. For loving me." Garrett tilted her chin up so he could see her face. "Willa, I did not save you. If anything, you saved me. I was drifting, going through the motions of life without any real purpose or direction. Then I met you and suddenly everything made sense. You gave me a reason to put down roots to build something permanent. You gave me a home." "We gave each other a home," Willa corrected. She stood on her toes and kissed him, and he responded eagerly, his arms tightening around her. They made love for the first time that night in their cabin, learning each other's bodies with gentle exploration. Garrett was patient and tender, making sure Willa felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed Mr. Willis had made, listening to the night sounds of the Nevada desert and marveling at how completely their lives had changed. "What do you think our life will look like 5 years from now?" Willa asked, tracing patterns on Garrett's chest. "Happy," he said immediately. "That is the most important part. Beyond that, I hope we will have expanded the ranch, maybe have some children running around. I hope Virginia City will have fully recovered and be thriving. I hope we will have grown old together in all the ways that matter." "I hope for all of that too." Willa pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "I never imagined I could be this happy. After everything that happened with the fever, I thought maybe I had used up all my capacity for joy, but you proved me wrong." "There is always room for more joy," Garrett said. "We just have to be brave enough to reach for it. And you, Willa Irving, are the bravest person I know." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and when morning came, they woke to their first full day as a married couple. Garrett made breakfast while Willa unpacked the few belongings she had brought from her old house. They worked together to make the cabin truly theirs, adding personal touches and deciding where things should go. Over the next weeks and months, their life together found its rhythm. Garrett worked the ranch with single-minded determination, starting with a small herd of cattle he purchased from a neighboring rancher. Willa continued her work in Virginia City, teaching piano and helping with community efforts to rebuild. She also proved to have a natural talent for ranching, learning quickly how to care for the animals and manage the practical aspects of their operation. Virginia City continued its recovery. The fever did not return, and gradually the population began to grow again as word spread that the danger had passed. New families moved in, and businesses reopened. The town held its first dance since the outbreak 6 months after Willa and Garrett's wedding, and everyone agreed it felt like a true return to normalcy. Willa and Garrett attended that dance, and as they moved together across the floor, she caught sight of the Henderson children watching from the sidelines. Sarah waved, and Willa waved back, smiling. Those children had lost their mother, but they were thriving under the Carvers' care, resilient and full of life. It was a reminder that healing was possible, that communities and individuals alike could survive terrible trauma and emerge stronger. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, following her gaze. "About how much has changed. A year ago, I was digging graves and wondering if Virginia City would survive. Now look at us. Thriving, happy together. It hardly seems possible. The best things in life often seem impossible until they happen." Garrett spun her in a complicated turn that made her laugh. "I am glad I was driving cattle past Virginia City when I was. I am glad I followed my instinct to help. I am glad you were too exhausted to send me away. I am glad for all of it too, even the hard parts, because they led me to you." As the night wore on and they danced and celebrated with their community, Willa felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strange path that had brought them here. She thought about that day in the cemetery, her hands bleeding and blistered, her body and spirit pushed past their limits. She thought about the moment Garrett had appeared at the edge of that grave like some answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. He had taken the shovel and said, "I will finish this one." Such simple words, but they had changed everything. He had not just finished that grave. He had helped her finish an entire chapter of grief and begin a new chapter of hope. A year after their wedding, on a cool October morning, Willa woke to find herself feeling queasy. She had suspected for a few weeks that she might be pregnant, but she had not wanted to say anything to Garrett until she was certain. Now, as the nausea rolled through her, she knew. "Are you all right?" Garrett asked, immediately concerned when he saw her face. "Yes, more than all right." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." The expression that crossed Garrett's face was pure joy. He let out a whoop that probably woke half the county and lifted Willa up, spinning her around despite her protests that he needed to be careful. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Put me down, you fool," Willa said, laughing. "You will make me sick." He set her down gently, then immediately dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her stomach as if he could hear the baby already. "Hello in there. This is your father. I just want you to know that you are already the most loved child in Nevada, and I cannot wait to meet you." Willa ran her fingers through his dark hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had become her everything. "We should tell the town. Everyone will be excited." "Not yet. Let us keep this just between us for a little while. I want to savor it." He looked up at her, his green eyes bright. "You are going to be an amazing mother, and you are going to be an amazing father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Willa's initial worries. She continued teaching piano through her first 2 trimesters, and Garrett became almost comically protective, insisting she rest constantly and avoid anything that might be remotely strenuous. Mrs. Carver and the other women in town rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and promising to help once the child arrived. On a warm June evening in 1878, nearly 2 years after that day in the cemetery when Garrett had first entered her life, Willa went into labor. Mrs. Carver attended her along with 2 other women who had experience with births. Garrett paced outside the cabin, unable to sit still, jumping at every sound from inside. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 18 hours. There were moments when Willa thought she could not endure another minute, but Mrs. Carver coached her through it with steady encouragement. And finally, as dawn broke over the Nevada mountains, she heard the sharp cry of a newborn. "It is a boy, Mrs. Carver announced, placing the squalling infant on Willa's chest. A healthy, loud boy. Willa looked down at her son and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. He was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. She traced his tiny features with one finger, marveling at the miracle of him. "Can I come in yet?" Garrett called from outside, sounding desperate. "Yes, come meet your son," Willa called back, laughing through her tears. Garrett burst through the door and froze when he saw them. His eyes filled with tears as he approached slowly, as if afraid he might break the spell. Willa held out the baby to him, and Garrett took his son with shaking hands. "He is perfect," Garrett whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Looking at Garrett holding their son, Willa knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas, after my father. Thomas Irving." "Thomas," Garrett repeated, testing the name. He looked at Willa with so much love it nearly took her breath away. "That is perfect. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, son." Little Thomas Irving proved to be a content baby, quick to smile and relatively calm. As he grew, it became clear he had inherited his father's green eyes and his mother's determined personality. Willa and Garrett fell into the rhythms of parenthood, exhausted but happy, their cabin filled with the sounds of family. The ranch prospered. Garrett's hard work paid off as their herd grew, and they became known for raising quality cattle. They hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Daniel who was reliable and respectful. With the extra help, Garrett was able to spend more time with Willa and Thomas, and their life settled into comfortable patterns. Virginia City continued to thrive around them. The town that had nearly died in the fever outbreak of 1876 had rebuilt itself into a vibrant community. The cemetery where Willa had dug so many graves was well maintained now, a place of remembrance rather than immediate grief. She visited her father's grave regularly, often bringing Thomas with her to tell him stories about the grandfather he would never meet. 2 years after Thomas's birth, Willa found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy felt easier somehow, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter Emma was born on a crisp November morning in 1880, and she had her mother's blonde hair and her father's easy temperament. Thomas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to hold her and help care for her. "We are a real family now," Garrett said one evening as they watched Thomas gently pat Emma's back while she slept in his lap. "We were always a real family," Willa corrected. "But I know what you mean. We are complete." "Should we have more?" Garrett asked. Willa considered this. She was 28 now, Garrett 31. They had room in their home and their hearts for more children if they came. "If we are blessed with more, I will welcome them, but I am content with what we have. 2 healthy children, a thriving ranch, a community we love. That is more than I ever dreamed of having." "More than either of us dreamed," Garrett agreed. He put his arm around her shoulders and they sat together watching their children, counting their blessings. As the years passed, their family did grow by one more. A son they named James arrived when Emma was 3 and Thomas was 5. James had his father's dark hair and his mother's intensity, and from the moment he could walk, he was into everything. Thomas took his role as oldest seriously, watching out for his younger siblings with protective devotion. Emma proved to be the peacemaker of the family, able to smooth over conflicts with a smile. The ranch expanded. They added more land, built a proper barn and several outbuildings, and became one of the more successful operations in the Virginia City area. Garrett proved to be not just a skilled cattleman but a savvy businessman, and Willa's contributions to both the ranch and the community were widely respected. She resumed teaching piano more regularly once the children were old enough, and their cabin often rang with music as all three children learned to play. The Henderson children, now grown, remained close to Willa and Garrett. Sarah married Daniel, the ranch hand they had hired years ago, and they built a house on the edge of the Irving property. James Henderson became a deputy sheriff in Virginia City, and little Emma Henderson, who had asked Willa if she was going to marry Garrett all those years ago, became a schoolteacher. The town held a 10th anniversary memorial service for the fever victims in 1886. Willa and Garrett attended with their children, now aged 8, 6, and 3. As the names of the dead were read aloud, including her father's, Willa held Garrett's hand and thought about how much had changed in a decade. "You ever think about that day?" she asked him afterward. "When you found me in the cemetery, all the time," Garrett admitted. "It was the day my life truly began. Everything before that was just practice for what came after. I was so exhausted I almost sent you away. But you did not. You let me help you, and that made all the difference." He squeezed her hand. "I will never stop being grateful for that." As they walked through the cemetery, past the graves Willa had dug with her own blistered hands, she felt a profound sense of peace. The pain of that time had not disappeared entirely. It never would, but it had been transformed into something else. Strength, maybe, or wisdom, or simply the knowledge that she could endure hard things and emerge on the other side. The Irving family continued to be a pillar of the Virginia City community. Garrett served on the town council, helping to make decisions about growth and development. Willa organized concerts and educational events, enriching the cultural life of the town. Their children grew up loved and secure, their home a place of laughter and music and unconditional acceptance. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1891, Garrett surprised Willa with a trip to San Francisco, that city she had once dreamed of visiting. They left the children with Mrs. Carver and her family and took the train west. Willa stared in wonder at the ocean, having never seen so much water in one place, and they walked along the docks holding hands like newlyweds. They attended the opera and ate at fancy restaurants and stayed in a hotel that seemed impossibly grand compared to their simple cabin. "What do you think?" Garrett asked as they stood on a pier watching the sun set over the Pacific. "Does it live up to your dreams?" "It is wonderful," Willa said honestly, "but I cannot wait to go home. Home to Virginia City, to our ranch, to our children. This is beautiful, but it is not ours. Nevada is ours." Garrett smiled and pulled her close. "That is exactly how I feel. We have built something special, you and I. Something worth protecting." They returned home refreshed and even more appreciative of what they had. The children tackled them with hugs, chattering about everything that had happened in their absence. The ranch had run smoothly without them, thanks to Daniel's capable management. Everything was as it should be. As the century drew to a close, Willa sometimes found herself reflecting on the incredible journey her life had taken. She was 45 now, her blonde hair showing streaks of silver, her hands marked with the honest calluses of ranch work rather than the desperate blisters of grave digging. Garrett, at 48, was still strong and vital, though his dark hair had gone gray at the temples. Their children were growing into remarkable young people. Thomas, at 18, was preparing to attend university in California, interested in veterinary medicine. Emma, 16, was already an accomplished pianist and teacher in her own right. Young James, 13, showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps as a rancher. Watching them, Willa marveled at the life she and Garrett had created. "Do you ever regret staying?" she asked Garrett one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. It was a question she had never asked before, but for some reason it felt important now. "Regret?" Garrett looked at her in surprise. "Not for a single moment. Why would you ask that? You gave up the freedom of the trail for this life." "Sometimes I wonder if you miss it, if you ever wish you had kept moving instead of settling down." Garrett took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her palm. "Willa, do you know what I was before I met you?" "I was rootless, drifting from job to job with no real purpose beyond the next paycheck. I told myself I was free, but really I was just lost. You gave me something to anchor myself to, a reason to stay in one place and build something permanent. You, this ranch, our children, Virginia City, this is the life I was always meant to live. I just did not know it until I found you." "I feel the same way," Willa admitted. "Everything that happened, all the pain and loss and grief, it led me to you. I would not change any of it, because changing it would mean not having this life we have built together." "Here is to us, then," Garrett said, raising an imaginary glass. "To blistered hands and finished graves, to taking chances on strangers, to building lives and raising children and growing old together. To all of it." "To all of it," Willa echoed, and she leaned over to kiss her husband of 15 years, this man who had appeared in her darkest hour and brought light back into her world. The years continued to unfold, bringing their share of joys and challenges. Thomas graduated from university and returned to Virginia City to open a veterinary practice, serving the ranching community with the same dedication his mother had shown during the fever outbreak. Emma married a musician from San Francisco and divided her time between the city and Virginia City, always making sure to visit regularly. James took over more of the ranch operations as Garrett gradually stepped back, proving to be as skilled a cattleman as his father. Virginia City celebrated its silver jubilee in 1901, marking 25 years since the fever outbreak that had nearly destroyed the community. The town organized a huge celebration, and Willa was asked to give a speech as one of the survivors who had helped the town endure its darkest hour. She stood before the gathered crowd, Garrett at her side as always, and spoke about resilience and community and the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. She talked about the importance of helping each other, of not turning away from suffering even when it would be easier to run. She spoke of the dead and honored their memory, but also celebrated the living and all they had achieved. When she finished, there was not a dry eye in the audience. People stood and applauded for several minutes, and Willa felt both humbled and proud. She had not done anything special, not really. She had simply refused to give up, and that had made all the difference. "Your father would be so proud of you," Garrett whispered in her ear as they left the stage. "I am so proud of you." "We did it together," Willa reminded him. "Everything we have, we built together. I could not have done any of this without you." "Partners," Garrett agreed. "In everything." As they entered their 60s, Willa and Garrett gradually transitioned into the role of beloved grandparents. Thomas and his wife gave them 3 grandchildren. Emma had 2, and James and his wife contributed 4 more. The Irving Ranch became the gathering place for the extended family, with children always running around and filling the air with noise and laughter. Willa taught piano to her grandchildren just as she had taught their parents, and Garrett told them stories of the old days, of cattle drives and wild places, and a young woman digging graves with blistered hands. The story of how he and Willa had met became family legend, told and retold until the children knew it by heart. "Tell us again about how you saved grandmother," one of the younger grandchildren would beg, and Garrett would shake his head. "I did not save your grandmother. She saved herself. She was the strongest, bravest person I ever met, and she still is. I just had the good sense to stick around once I found her." On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1906, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren came from all over, filling the ranch house they had expanded over the years. There was music and dancing and so much food the tables groaned under the weight of it. As Willa and Garrett moved through the crowd, greeting loved ones and accepting congratulations, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the abundance of her life. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Willa and Garrett sat alone on their porch under a canopy of stars. It was quiet except for the night sounds of the desert, and Willa leaned against her husband's shoulder, content. 30 years, she marveled. It seems both longer and shorter than that somehow. I know what you mean. Sometimes it feels like we have always been together, and sometimes I can barely believe how lucky I am to have found you. Garrett pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible, Willa Irving. And you have been my rock, my partner, my great love. Thank you for taking that shovel all those years ago. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this life with me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, Garrett said. Every single moment. They sat together in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Their hands, weathered now with age and work, intertwined naturally, fitting together as they had for 3 decades. Willa thought about those hands that had once been so blistered and torn, hands that had dug graves and mourned the dead. Now they held grandchildren and played piano and helped run a successful ranch. They had healed, just as she had healed, just as Virginia City had healed. Life was not about avoiding pain or hardship, she had learned. It was about enduring those things and finding meaning on the other side. It was about accepting help when you needed it, offering help when you could give it, and building connections that made life worth living. It was about love in all its forms, family and community, and the deep partnership between two people who chose each other every day. As she and Garrett sat beneath the Nevada stars, Willa felt at peace. Their story had begun in a graveyard, with death all around and hope in short supply. But it had blossomed into something magnificent, a love that had weathered every storm and grown stronger with each passing year. They had raised children, built a legacy, and helped a community thrive. And they had done it all together, partners in every sense of the word. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, as he had so many times over the years. "About how grateful I am," Willa said simply. "For everything, for you most of all. I love you, Willa Irving. I have loved you since the day I saw you in that cemetery, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too, Garrett Irving, always and forever." They sat together as the night deepened around them, two people who had found their home in each other, who had taken tragedy and transformed it into triumph. The future stretched out before them, however many years they had left, and Willa faced it without fear. She had Garrett by her side, their family around them, and a lifetime of beautiful memories to sustain them. She had everything she needed, everything she had ever wanted, and so much more than she had dared to dream of that terrible day in the cemetery, when a kind stranger had taken a shovel from her bleeding hands and said 5 words that changed her life forever. "I will finish this one." And he had. He had finished that grave, and then he had helped her finish grieving, and then they had started building together. Building a home, a family, a life worth living. They had taken the worst moment and transformed it into the beginning of something beautiful. As they finally rose to go inside, Garrett took Willa's hand once more, and she laced her fingers through his, these hands that had worked and loved and built so much together. They walked into their home, filled with the evidence of their life well lived, and Willa knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Their story, which had begun with blistered hands and buried dreams, had become a testament to the power of love, resilience, and human connection. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. And it was their story, belonging to Willa and Garrett Irving, two souls who had found each other against all odds and created something extraordinary from the ruins of tragedy. The end.